Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. My name is Arya Maisara binti Abdullah. I am from PA111 and today we will talking about Malaysia's trade performance. Let's go. To start, let's dive beyond the surface of Malaysia's 2025 trade numbers, not just by describing the trend, but interpreting the why behind the numbers. In 2024, Malaysia recorded a trade value of RM 2.879 trillion, a solid 9.2% growth from the previous year. However, despite this rise in trade, the trade surplus dropped sharply, down by 36.4% to RM 136.88 billion. On the surface, this seems paradoxical. If the trade is expanding, shouldn't the surplus grow too? It suggests that domestic consumption and industrial demand have increased significantly, likely indicating a robust local investment in manufacturing inputs, machinery, and capital goods. A rising import of intermediate and capital goods often precedes industrial growth, but when not matched by a similar export expansions, it tightens the trade balance. Now, let's look at what drove exports. Electrical and electronics, E&E products, were dominant, up by 28% and comprising a third of all exports. That's substantial, but this heavy dependence on a single category signals concentration risks. Any volatility in global semiconductor demand or tech supply chains should disproportionately affect Malaysia's export. On the import sides, E&E components, machinery, and chemicals also double-digit growth, reinforcing the idea of Malaysia's playing a key role in global value chains, especially in electronic manufacturing. But with such a reliance, Malaysia remains exposed to global technical cycles and geopolitical trade tensions. When we look closely at the dynamic of Malaysia's trade markets, several underlying patterns emerge that go beyond surface level statistics. Take the United States, for example. Malaysia's export to the US grew by a striking 23.2% over the year, and even more impressively, by 41.3% in December alone. This sharp rise likely reflects the surge in demand for tech-related products, but more importantly, it signals a strategic shift in trade flows, potentially a deliberate diversification away from over-reliance on China. And that brings us to China. The trade relationship with China reveals a different kind of shifts. Exports to China actually declines slightly by 2.2%, while imports from China increased by almost 15%. This imbalance underscores Malaysia's increasing dependence on China as a key supplier, particularly for intermediate and capital goods. It's a growing asymmetry that raises questions about long-term trade resilience. If China continues to account for a larger share of Malaysia's imports without a corresponding growth in exports, the trade relationship becomes less of partnership and more dependency. Meanwhile, trade with Asia, Malaysia's largest regional trade bloc, continues to be significant in volume, but the growth rate of just 4.2% suggests something deeper. This modest pace may point to market saturation within the region or perhaps structural barriers that limit further expansion of intra-Asian trade. In short, regional ties may remain strong, but the growth potentially be plateauing. So, what does all of this mean as we look ahead to 2025? First, there's a clear trade-off emerging. Malaysia's overall trade figures are strong, even setting new records. But beneath that, a growing resilience on importance and a shrinking trade surplus could begin to exert downward pressure on the ringgit and restrict economic policy space if the trend continues. Second, the surge in imports, particularly of machinery, electronics, and intermediate goods, points to an internal transformation. Malaysia appears to be ramping up its industrial capabilities, especially in the tech sector. That's encouraging for long-term competitiveness. But in the short term, it puts pressure on the trade balance and requires a careful fiscal and monetary coordination. Finally, the evolving geography of Malaysia's trade, shifting towards the US and Taiwan and subtly moving away from China, reflects broader global realignments. As the global supply chains recalibrate and geopolitical uncertainties persist, Malaysia will need to navigate these shifts with strategic agility. Balancing this new alliance while managing the existence of dependency will be the key to sustaining trade momentum and national economic stability in the year ahead. So, to conclude, Malaysia's trade outlook is one of high potential but high exposure. Strong fundamentals are in place, but economic resilience will depend on diversifying both products and partner while managing the fine line between industrial growth and trade imbalances. That's all from me. So, thank you for listening and goodbye.